Hello, BookTube. Today, I want to talk about critical pedagogy and specifically the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed. While this video will appeal to those in the education field or fields, it can be used by anybody who teaches. It's beneficial to anybody who has to teach somebody something. And even if you're not in that position, it can help explain, I think, why some teachers really resonated with you, while the vast majority of them were like dead fish, right? This explains this phenomena. You've all had teachers, I'm sure, that blew you out of the water. And I bet there are specific reasons why that I'm going to cover. And then there are other teachers that they didn't do anything for you. Okay, so, with a little bit of that preamble out of the way, let's get into, well, what is critical pedagogy? Well, any field with the word critical in it, any discipline, um, critical race theory, critical whatever, is going to come from the Marxist tradition. And before you brush off, because Americans are still, we still suffer from the hangover of uh, Marxism and Marx being a kind of dirty words, dirty concepts. And that just shows the kind of lackluster education we have in America and kind of the cultural repression. There are few. Maybe he's the only one. Marx is probably the only intellectual to have influenced every country in the world that we know of. I'm sure that there are some countries that are cloistered, but it has made its way all right from when he wrote Capital in London. It made its way around Europe, Russia, Asia, Africa, South America, America. It's all over the world. There are few intellectual traditions that have that kind of an impact. His would probably be the only one that I can think of off the top of my head. And so the fact that it's repressed or the fact that it's considered dirty should make you question why. Like when I was in college, Marx was kind of seen as, oh, right? Like, oh, you don't deal with that. That's nonsense. It was brushed aside. It was kind of like an open secret. Don't talk about Marx. I think we're starting to come out of that as we have seen viscerally the failures of capitalism, that we can't put blinders over our eyes anymore, like a little kid, right? That when we see the utter failure of capitalism in the most extreme, the depravity of and the excesses, it can't be ignored anymore. It's in your face. Wealth inequality is in your face. And these billionaires that try to be likable, which they're barely human, right? Like I'm sure if you've ever listened to someone like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or fucking Peter Thiel, they don't sound human. Now, this isn't to dehumanize them. What it's to say is they ain't like us. The way they talk, the way that they think, they ain't like us. So now is a good time to delve into the Marxist tradition and into Marx and the Marxist tradition. And what makes the repression so weird is that it influenced the social sciences. After Marx, whether you agreed with him or not, he had a massive influence because you had people either responding against Marx, correcting Marx, or building on Marx. That's like sociology for, right? Like you can't very well talk about sociology and not talk about Marx. You just can't. You can't talk about history. You can't talk about the history of ideas. To leave Marx out of the equation of acceptable discourse would be like in astronomy if you couldn't talk about heliocentrism, right? That the earth goes around the sun. It'd be like if it was a dirty word, for example, to say that the earth is round. That may seem like an extreme, but the influence Marx had on every discipline, implicitly or explicitly, cannot be overstated. You go to any country in the world, there are Marxists, right? With their own brand of Marxism, right? With their own brand, with their own take on it, with their own revisions and corrections. Okay, I think that's enough little preamble out of the way. So, what is critical pedagogy? Well, to understand critical pedagogy, we have to understand Marx's central project in Capital, in his 3 volumes of Capital, which I would highly recommend that you read. They're very good. It's the gold standard for analyzing capitalism. And contrary to what Republican and conservative dipshits will say, it's not a communist text. Marx said very little on what communism actually is and what he thinks it. Him and Engels gestured a little bit. He was mostly interested, it's very clear, he was mostly interested in a critical analysis of capitalism as a political economy. That's what his main his main project was. He had some ideas of what would come after, but those were underdeveloped compared to his critique of capitalism, and boiled down, distilled, essentially what Marx is looking at is he wants to look at the relationship and analyze the relationship between employer and employee. And he sees this unequal relationship, much like there is the unequal relationship in slavery, like there is in feudalism. And Marx's great insight, one of his wonderful insights that I took from Marx, and that a lot of people take from Marx, is the distribution of goods and services, like how we distribute goods and services, whether it be in feudalism, slavery, or capitalism, is fundamentally one of exploitation that has conflict built into it. It's just a matter of aesthetic preferences. Now, some Marxists might disagree with me and say that there's more marked differences, but I would push back on that. So you have, in slavery, you have 2 classes, roughly. You have the slave owners and the slaves. The slaves get almost nothing. The slave owners get almost everything, right? Obviously, we have to say almost because you still have to feed a slave and house them, right? But damn near everything goes to the slave owner. Slaves do all the work, the masters do, or the slave owners do none of the work. Then you have lords and serfs, another economic arrangement where you are born on a piece of land, the Lord's land, which is kind of your own. You work your land, let's say 3 days a week. You keep that. The other 3 days, you work the Lord's land, and he keeps that. Again, not that different from slavery. You still have this division of owner, not owner. It's still slavery to a certain degree, through a certain lens. You are still tethered, which you have the Lord doing none of the work and the serf doing all of the work. In slavery, you got the slave doing all of the work, the Lord doing none of the work. And Marx's insight was to notice that, after the French Revolution, it was supposed to bring capitalism was supposed to usher in, equality, fraternity, brotherhood, equality, et cetera, right? All these really great things. And Marx looked around him and saw, wait a minute, we don't have these things. We have, tenement houses, which, if you're not familiar, which would be, in the 1800s and sort of the golden age of capitalism, people who would, for a few, a penny or two, sleep over a rope. They have a rope lined up across the room. And you'd have people working, 16-hour days going to these places, draped over a rope, sleeping. Immense poverty. So Marx is looking around, right? He's looking around and he's seeing, wait a minute, capitalism promised us all of these wonderful things. The proponents of capitalism promise us all of these wonderful things, and we don't have any of them. And Marx observed, well, we don't have any of them because the underlying relationship has stayed fundamentally the same. Slave, slave owner, serf, lord, employee, employer. You have this class distinction. And so long as you have this class distinction, you're going to recreate. You can make any economic system you want. You're going to still lead to the same problems of the past. And so for me, this might be a contentious claim, but I don't view serfdom, slavery, or capitalism as, at their rock bottom, fundamentally different. They're aesthetically different, but when you strip it down, they're really just reinventions. They're reinventions of the same thing, of this division of master, slave, master, call it what you like. And yes, there are differences. I would call them cosmetic differences. I mean, you can say something like this. I mean, you might say, well, in slavery, the slave owner owns you. But in capitalism, your employer doesn't own you. Correct. But what if you don't go to work? If the slave doesn't pick cotton, let's say, just to use American slavery, if the slave doesn't pick cotton, he's beaten to death, or he's beaten. Now, if you decide to not go to your job that you hate, and that you wake up every morning and you despise your boss and you hate your boss, what would happen if you didn't go to work? You would die. Because you wouldn't have money. The money would stop coming in. You wouldn't be able to pay your rent, you wouldn't be able to eat, and you would die. So what really is the difference? What's really the difference? No, your boss doesn't own you. But make no mistake, when you clock in, for, let's just say 9 to 5. Let's pretend that those still exist in some meaningful fashion and not this gig economy bullshit. When you clock in 9 to 5, you're in an authoritarian structure, aren't you? Do you have any say in how things happen? No. You do what the boss and the managers tell you to do. And if you don't, hit the road. And if you hit the road, you got to find another job. And in this economy, good fucking luck. So, okay, that's a bit of me just droning on about Marxism. I'm going to put my cards on the table. I would consider myself a Marxist to some degree. And so, yeah. Now, let's transition to critical pedagogy after this little bit of preamble. What critical pedagogy attempts to do is look at the relationship between teacher and student and analyze that. And so when we analyze that, what we see, and this is what Pablo noticed, was you see this relationship of the teacher being a kind of, I mean, he might not say this, but I'll say this, as a kind of godly figure, imparting upon the students, filling the students up with information, right? You have the knower on the one hand, the teacher, and the ignorant on the other. And it is the educator's job to fill them up. He calls this the banking notion of education, where you view students as empty vessels to be, filled up. Is this an effect? Is this an and is this effective education? Yes and no. It depends how you view it. It's effective if you don't want people to remember anything. If you want people to be smart enough to work machines, but dumb enough to not understand how bad they're being fucked, right? You've all been through education where the minute the class was over, you forgot everything. The minute the test was over, you forgot everything. And Pablo would say, listen, it's because the teacher is operating on this banking notion where he, she, or they are the knower and the student is the dumb idiot object there to passively receive information. And Pablo would say, no, that perpetuates cycles of oppression and it views the student as an object to be manipulated, an object to be used. They're passive. And Pablo invites a different understanding, which is a kind of co-creative, in which the teacher is not above the student and the student is not above the teacher. They are equals in some sense. The teacher knows things and the student knows things. And the job of the teacher is to liberate the student. Or not, no, that's too much. I have to correct that. Is to guide them and to work beside them so that they can liberate themselves. So education is fundamentally an emancipatory project. It's a way of evaluating your situation. And the teacher's job is to guide, is to fight alongside the students, to guide the students as equals in the struggle for emancipation. Now, this can take many forms. You can, even if you don't have this kind of emancipatory project, you can view this notion of what I like to call organic learning, in which the students teach themselves and I'm there to guide them, right? So I'm going to use an example from a different field. I knew somebody who would teach grade school science, just regular grade school science. And when she got to geology, she would pair students up in groups of, like, I don't know, let's just say 5. Have a bunch of rocks in boxes and say, listen, categorize these, come up with a taxonomy. And then it was hands off for a bit. And the students would fumble around and, the kids were, and then she would walk around and say, why did you categorize this here? Why did you put this rock with this rock and not over here? And then the students would think again. Now, what is she mimicking? What is she trying to imitate? The natural process of discovery. She's not telling the kids the classification and say, here, memorize, this is the taxonomy of rocks and minerals and whatever, which the student's going to forget right after the test. And if you were taught that way, I bet you did too. The student's going to learn organically by trial and error, by process of reasoning through taxonomic processes, how to categorize rocks and minerals. Probably they're going to remember that. In my field, how I do it is I walk students through the arguments for different ideas, for different philosophical views. And I actively want them to participate and to push back. And as I said in a previous video, I never view the student as some dumb fuck. Unfortunately, many in my profession view students as a burden or an obstacle. Like, oh, okay, I gotta teach these students so that I can go back to writing my article that 5 people will ever read. The important stuff. The fuck out of here. Sorry, I have little patience for that. I have written academic papers, and it is the boringest thing you can think of. Okay, enough on that. But a lot of my colleagues seem to have contempt for students, which baffles me. It absolutely baffles me. This is the next generation. These are the people who are going to inherit the world. Don't you want them to be the best that they can be? Now, that's not to say I'm like the super duper, best teacher out there. But the students are great. And again, I'm echoing stuff from previous videos, so if you've watched previous videos, you already know. You'll learn a lot. But you got to meet them where they're at. You got to get to know them. And that might be harder in a kind of, if you're in K through 12, where they work you to death. I suppose I have it easier because I'm at the college level, where I can kind of get to know a student's interests and tailor make examples for them. But if you treat the student as an equal, as somebody who knows things, as a group of people who know things, they'll remember. They really will. There's kind of this old cliche notion that I've always hated, which is if you can reach one student a year or one student a semester, it's a success. I thought that was a failure. I'm like, wait a minute. I've got like 20 some students. If I reach one of them, that's a pretty bad average, right? Uh, and also this weird notion about, well, students are just going to forget everything when they leave anyway. Again, I thought that was bizarre. And I never accepted either of those. I never accepted either of those. I thought, I can't reach everybody because there's going to be just those students that they just dig their heels in, right? They and refuse to learn. But I would say 60 to 70% minimum. They may not come into your class wanting to learn the subjects, but you can make it exciting. Any subject, even subjects like economics and mathematics, you can make dynamic and thrilling, right? I mean, I just talked a little bit about Marxian economics here, and I hope that that was a little bit thrilling to you. You're like, wow, I want to know more. I hope, right? If you show enthusiasm, it's going to bleed over. But you can really only show enthusiasm, true enthusiasm, if you view the student as somebody who has something to offer to the conversation. And I'm going to reference students in this video, not by name. I've gotten emails years later. I taught this one person, and I mentioned this in a previous video, and I know I'm saying that. I taught her in one class in 2018, and she emailed me in 2023, years later, and said, I don't know if you remember me, but, and she listed off, and she even went on to another school, a way better school than I ever went to, and wrote a paper about stuff that I had taught her that she had retained. And she still had the book that we used. And she said she's read it several times. I had another student. And again, if you treat them like equals, if you treat them like people and not just empty vessels and objects to be filled up, you will get this. I had this other student, and she asked me, can I just sit in on your class? Sure. I'm of the opinion anybody who wants to listen to me, yep. If there's room in the class, come on in, right? And again, years later, she emailed me and said I was struggling with depression. I was struggling. I was in an abusive relationship and I was mostly housebound. But because of your class, I was able to, it was the one, it was the 2 days a week. I think I taught that one 2 days a week. It was those 2 days that I got the courage to leave the house. And then the courage to finally leave her abusive partner. That's your reward, in case you're wondering, for taking the critical pedagogical approach. Is you will really change lives. You will really, and there's no feeling like it. There really isn't a feeling like that of getting that email. And then you think, I do remember you. And then you find out that they're doing well. Sometimes you find out that they're not. I had many of those. I've had many of those. Because I teach to put it, I teach the losers of capitalism. I teach those that probably won't aspire, not aspire, but probably won't reach great heights. And so you get the sad stories too, but you also get those that are people that have somehow overcome. And that feeling, oh my God, if you're a teacher, oh my God, it's so good. It's the best feeling that there is. It really is. I mean, this is a booktube channel. I love reading as much as the rest of you who are watching this, but I'll take that any day of the week. I'll take getting an email from somebody I taught telling me how I transformed their lives. Reading is an invitation, as Steve Donahue would say, for the author to move furniture around in your mind. So is teaching. If you do it right. And so if you're an educator and you're still listening, and I'm going to wrap this up here so this doesn't go on and on, view your students as equals and as people. I mean, really view them as people. People with things to bring to the table, to bring to the conversation, with experiences that are relevant. And especially now, education is the antidote to fascism. Real education, not indoctrination, not just telling people what to think, but how to think, how to approach problems, and co developing solutions. Problem solving together is the antidote to fascism. It's not a coincidence that every fascist regime, including the current one we have in the US, hates education, hates it. That's not a coincidence. Hitler hated education. Mussolini hated education. Stalin hated education. Every fascist regime on the planet hates real education because real education is going to get you to challenge power structures, challenge authority, challenge and be cognizant of how bad you're getting fucked. And if you're really cognizant, and they don't want that obviously, but if you're really cognizant and you get people to see how bad they're getting fucked, then they're going to do something about it. And the masters, they don't want that. The fascists, they don't want that. The capital owners, they don't want that. They want you dumb. They want you servile. They want you to be satisfied with the scraps, with the crumbs that they brush from their table. Here, peasant, be happy with this. No. The next generation deserves better. I believe. But then again, I come from a tradition that thinks that all people ought to be treated with dignity, respect, and have their needs met. That's the tradition I come from. A deeply humanist tradition. Okay. I hope this is of some value to you. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. I have had such a warm welcome here on BookTube, and this is like, I don't know, a little over 2 weeks since I joined, and I've already got close to 30 subscribers. Like, that's amazing to me. I figured there would be, and I'm getting, 20, 30 views a video, which is, I mean, I view that, I mean, I think that's wonderful. I just think that's wonderful. I mean, people, I'll end with this. I always find it amazing people who complain about, oh, I can't do a dedicated book review. It doesn't get as many views. And then you're like, well, the last book review you did got 10,000 views. That's if you're in a band and you play a gig, like a well-known band. If you play a well-known, if you're a well-known band, you're like a Metallica. You're playing 10 for 10,000 people. You're doing good. You're doing fucking great. What are you talking about? The metric on here is bizarre. Well, if I don't get 100,000 views on a video, it's a failure. What? What? How divorced from reality is that? Okay, that's okay. This is going to explode if I go on another tirade. So I will end it here and say thank you so much for making it to the end. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.